Like she said, this is the second part, and this is actually the last part of the project template webinar series that we have. And this one is kind of wrapping things up here. So just as a quick overview, we're going to talk about creating the workflow of creating P&ID symbols, the tool palettes and annotations. So those kind of go hand in hand together. And then really discuss blocks and how you have different types of blocks that you're going to need, title blocks, excuse me, different types of title blocks that you're going to need for your projects. So go to the next slide here. Okay, awesome. All right, so this is kind of jumping into best practices for our AutoCAD standards. So these are really, it's just a short list of things that are, I wouldn't say pain points, but things to think about. So these are things that you're definitely going to need to successfully implement your project. Dave, you want to talk about the drawing template?
Yeah, so a lot of these kind of, when you start thinking about how you're going to implement things, you have to refer to what your current existing standard. So your company probably has a CAD standard defined somewhere. Maybe you're going to kind of just pull from a previous project or something like that. But either way, there's a bunch of stuff that applies and needs to come from just regular AutoCAD setup. And then on top of that, you have Plant 3D specific things. So here in this first page, we've identified what are the types of things that you might need to account for that would come out of your standard AutoCAD setup. And so these things will probably apply to more than just the Plant 3D product. It might apply to just regular AutoCAD, or if you're using other products like AutoCAD Electrical, or if you want to get consistent drawings out as a firm, these are probably standards you already have set up in place. So these are the types of things that will continue in terms of you're going to reuse or use those existing items and keep them in place. Like, for example, Plant 3D in the orthographic drawing setup doesn't have a way to place section and detail callouts. So you would use your standard AutoCAD section or detail callout to label your views. Also, kind of along those veins, north arrow. So if you place a north arrow on your ortho drawing planes and sections, then you would need to pull in your company standard. And so we've identified a selection of items that are just going to come from your AutoCAD standards, and you'll be reusing these in part of your Plant 3D setup. So in the drawing template, within that subset of items, you also have items that reside inside of your drawing template. And so these are things that you would store internally to a DWT, like your styles, dimension styles, layer states, and so on. Some of these can be exported like layer states, but if you start them with your template, it'll help you kind of get a streamlined process moving forward.
Awesome. All right, let's jump to the next slide. So this is kind of pushing back towards Plant 3D standards as opposed to your regular AutoCAD standards. So these are going to be specific to Plant. So things like your P&ID template, with your drawing template, with your title block, report templates, ISO styles. These are all things that don't necessarily, I guess in this case, they do live within the project, but they're not necessarily useful in other programs. So like if you're doing, like you said, AutoCAD Electrical, you probably don't need ISO styles. So, but that, like I said, this is specific to Plant 3D.
Yeah, and so a couple common things. So we start like with the title block scenario, we would start with your standard company title block. But if you would choose and you want to make it fully intelligent to work with the project manager and project setup and any custom drawing properties, then we're going to customize that title block and add AutoCAD fields to it so that it can intelligently update when you change properties within your drawing. Also, like a plant UCS. So very commonly, the common standard when using Plant 3D is to locate your models as close to the origin as possible. So as part of what we would define as part of your project standard is when you create a model template, you would define where your plant UCS is, and then you'll be able to shift between real world coordinates and what we call origin coordinates, which is the piping model located as close to 0, 0. With a custom UCS, you can switch back and forth and still use commands like ID and then identify the actual elevation point. And there's other tools within Plant 3D to accommodate shifting your base point so that you can show real world coordinates in ISOs or orthos. So those are just two examples of ways that we would implement things on top of regular AutoCAD. for Plant 3D specifically.
Awesome, yeah.
Caleb, I guess you want to cover where the layer standards and line types would be used in the project symbol style drawing?
Yeah, sure. So layer standards and line types. So typically with things like your ISOs, you're going to be using your line types different. Really, you need to make sure you have the correct line types for what you want to represent. The same with font standards and layers. I mean, going in and having everything on the correct layer instead of just letting it fall all on on zero layer. Probably don't want to do that. That's not the best practice. And really, a layer standard comes in handy. We recently had a customer do they had modules essentially. So for each little portion of their unit, they had modules. And they didn't realize that if you implement layer standards, you can actually make those modules so you can turn them on and off. So you can actually see what is there and what is not. So that really helped them a lot. They didn't realize you could do that. So there's a lot of little things like that that you implement, and that really makes a big difference when it comes to saving time in your design process.
Yep. Also, kind of to wrap up this, but the reason we specialized in pipe spec content, we identified those separately, is because with your spec content, if you want to define properties that should be pulled into your P&IDs or into your model, the best place to get those in is at the spec level for parts like fittings or valves or things like that. If they're going to be applied to multiple objects, but it's the same value. So then we would use the spec to drive those property values. And when you do that, you have to have the same property in your project template that is in the pipe spec that you want to bring in. So for example, if you wanted to fill in, let's say, a item code from a purchasing system, in addition to using the item code property, you might want to fill in and create a custom property called, let's say, Maximo number or something like that. And then create that property in your specs and in your project template and in your catalogs. And then that value would come all the way through. And so your spec information and the details you need to get out of your reports also will affect your project template.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of talk about this, side note, this is a lot of information that we're giving you. I mean, this is really a lot of stuff that's going on. If you miss something, if you have questions about something, don't worry. We're actually in the process of, today we released the first blog. We're going to be releasing this in small chunks, so in a lot more in detail. So instead of just giving you the overview here, we're going to explain exactly what to do for each step. And we're starting to release that today with our blogs. So stay tuned for that. But that is going to be very helpful, I feel, for everyone. So.
Yes. I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, it should be awesome. So P&ID symbols. This is, if you're doing P&ID projects, this is an integral, crucial part of your project. And, this kind of goes back to our pain points. Consistency. So if you don't have consistency, across the board, across multiple projects, it could be the difference between retaining a client and losing a client. So it's very, very important. So looking at this, we kind of go through and we talk about how we set those up and all the things we think about whenever we're implementing P&ID symbols.
Yeah, so a lot of this information is covered in the Tailoring AutoCAD P&ID and Plant 3D PDF. If you do a quick Google search, it will come up. I've put a link to it for Misty to include in the email that she sends out for resources. And so a lot of this process is covered. We'll go through it, like Caleb mentioned, in more detail in some blog articles. There's a couple steps that we've added, though, towards this process, just because it's very easy to focus sometimes on the technical steps and then kind of miss the framework that you need to do the work in so that you don't miss things in the big picture. So starting with like a 2D block library. So let's say that your company has an existing, coming from AutoCAD, an existing block library or drawings. Or it might be, you might have some existing AutoCAD lead sheets that have P&ID symbols on them. So both of those cases are where we would start with making sure that you have those requirements in hand. And then what you're going to do out of that is we're going to do what we call a gap analysis. The gap analysis is basically a kind of like a business consulting step where you compare two different solutions or two different lists of items and look to see what the differences are. And so that gap analysis would compare, like, let's say we start with, in general, the PIP symbol set. And so we would compare the PIP symbol set that comes with Plant 3D with your existing block library. And then we'd identify, all right, what's in your library that's not in the symbol set, and then what's in the symbol set that you don't have in your library but you might want. And so we have, we do that process. We go through a spreadsheet, mark it up, and then that gives you an idea of, well, how many symbols do you need to create in order to be able to standardize your symbols for your PNIDs. And then the same thing needs to be done for your annotation. So in order to move away from having fully just text or MText based annotations, we want to make those intelligent. So we would take some sample drawings, it might be 5 or 6 or 7, pick a smattering of them from, we don't need to look at all 1,000 drawings of your PNIDs, but pick a sample set of drawings and go through and see what you are calling out on a regular basis. There will still be some instances where you're just using text, but our goal is if there's a tagged item or if there is a property that's coming from the data of your objects, we want to have that information be driven from your annotations. Annotations in Plant 3D is a special word that basically is a piece of linked text to the database, so that when the property changes in the project database, the annotation gets updated automatically, so you don't have to manually go through that.
Yeah.
And so we're going to do some. Yeah.
I was going to say, we all hate that moment that we all hate that moment that you go and update a drawing and your annotations are still the same. And you're like, oh, I should have fixed that. But there's ways to fix that automatically.
Yeah, or like when you're preparing a print set and you get all the drawings out and you realize I did not fix that piece of text. So that is a very frustrating place to be. So annotations are the way that Play 3D has an answer to having intelligent text on your drawings. And so this is sort of some best practices we've developed. We go through and we insert those blocks into the project symbol style. So the project symbol style is a drawing that is associated with Plant 3D. So I misspoke. So this step is actually to bring your layers in. So your PNID layers, equipment, mechanical items, instrument layers, and so on, whatever that is from your standards, you want to have those added to your project symbol style drawing so that when we actually go to create the symbols, the layers will be present. Likewise, your fonts or your line types, if they don't exist in the project symbol style drawing, you won't be able to select them when you're going to define your lines or your signal lines, your process lines, or any of your symbols. Then the next step is after you've saved those, we're going to go through the process of cleaning those in the lead sheets. And so, Caleb, I think we captured some notes on the types of things we do to clean symbols. You want to cover some of those?
Yes. I'm not sure how to access the notes.
I found it. So there's a panel actually that says.
Oh, there is.
Where'd it go? Slide notes. Do you see that?
I do not.
Okay. Sorry about that.
I found it.
Got it?
Yeah, I found it. Sorry about that. So, so we have a, talking about that, there's a list of things that you need to do cleaning up your symbols in your lead sheet, right? So really the best way to explain it is it's really, so things like snaps, things like your layers, making sure your layers are set properly, your fonts, making sure your fonts are set to the correct standard, things like that. So just making sure that whenever you are placing these over and over and over again within your project, you're not placing something that maybe has a big gap in the middle of it, or it isn't quite on snap, and every time you try to connect the line, it makes some weird squiggly. And there's little things like this that really make a big difference when it comes to placing items on your PC.
Yeah, so like as an example, let's take, I'll just pick like a gate valve. A lot of times, oddly enough, when we place these on our lead sheet, we might not have them to scale. And sometimes we forget about that, and we go through the process of building, 30 or 40 symbols, and we realize when we go to test it, oh, these weren't on the legend sheet at scale. And so just going through, making sure that everything is cleaned up, it's scaled appropriately, there's no nested blocks. You want to set the layer to by block, because when you go to use like the color override, so if you were to go to color by service or something like that, if it's not set to by block, it's not going to change the color of the object. And so that's another one of the standards that's not one you wouldn't typically see in other products. Like regular AutoCAD, we almost never set color to by block. It's almost always by layer. But in this case, for Plant 3D, setting it to by block gives you the power of being able to use the PNID Painter tools. So those are some other standards that we implement in the process of cleaning our lead sheet. And then moving on down, I like to set a tool palette path to an empty folder. So that way, when I create new tool palettes, they're all just in one spot. I can move them to a network, depending on what your ideology is for sharing tool palettes, whether you like to export them or put them on a network. You'll follow different steps. But this way, you'll have a distinct list of palettes that you created.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let me jump to the next slide here. All right, so kind of going in what we were talking about before with that, the whole PNID painter and things like that, setting a color key. So this is something that I implemented maybe 5 or 6 years ago. My engineering manager that I was working with was explaining to me the importance of a color key and explaining to me, hey, you're going to have different options, that you're going to have different custom properties possibly, or even things like your statuses. And that's really the most common one, is statuses. And just being able to quickly identify these in things like model reviews and things like that is extremely important. So being able to go in and actually set those color keys to your preferences, and then you can actually go in and assign the color keys using things like the PNID painter and things like that. Extremely useful.
Nice.
Jump to the next one here. All right, so this one may require a little more explanation. So PNID and Ortho title blocks. So you notice there are not ISO title blocks here. We're going to get to those in just a second. Those are kind of a different animal altogether. But your PNID and Ortho title blocks are very similar in the way they're set up. They're set up using your standard title block. You can set your annotations and you can set your fields to make sure that that information is populating correctly. And then there's a few examples of other things here. Setting drawing properties, sample values, setting properties to, if you notice it just has the air quotes there, that's setting them to blank, if you will.
Yeah, I did want to, so again, these steps have a lot more detail in the Tailoring AutoCAD PNID and Plant 3D PDF. But we'll also do follow-up blog articles about this specifically. But basically the goal is, if you want to make this fully intelligent, then this would be the set of steps that you would take in order to be able to fill in your properties for your drawings in the project manager. Also have those properties show up in reports or in Power BI dashboards.
Absolutely. All right. Okay, and then like I said, ISO styles. So I believe we have ISO styles and then an ISO title block slide coming up as well. So this is really setting up the ISO style itself. So going in and actually setting it up, I know that in the past, Dave, I've had tons of problems trying to set this up correctly. And it's something that a lot of people have issues with. I mean, it's a complicated process, but once you're actually walk through it and you explain how everything works, it makes so much more sense. Now it's a breeze to do. Like, it really is. It's kind of funny. So.
And they've made updates to it every year, I think. So this year, 2023, is even easier than before, and there's a lot more tools in the UI that we can use now.
Yeah, things like your dimensions and annotations, they're really taking those up a notch. I remember before it was kind of like, how do we change it? It's like, do you know Python code? Because I don't know how to do it. But now it's as simple. I mean, it's buttons and slides and settings. I mean, drop-down menus, it's all within the project setup. It's very nice. It's very nice what they've done with it.
Yeah.
And
there's still a lot of figuring out how you want it to look, but there's a lot more tools there to make it look the way you want it to.
Absolutely, yeah. And then jumping over to our ISO title block setup. So, like you said, this one is a little bit different animal than all the other title blocks. It's a little more. Well, really, Dave, why don't you explain it? It's a little better.
Yeah, so this is one of those. The reason it's so unique is, and as a by way of reference, so we went through in the first video in episode 1 and defined how to identify what kind of property, where a property should be stored. And so go ahead and take a look at that property list. But one of the things we identified was that when you're creating title block properties, the only way to get that data into the title block for ISOs is to use the P3D line group class. And so what that means is that with each line group, you can add columns and values, properties like testing pressures, testing methods, and so on like that. And then those can show up in your title block. But your normal process of doing custom drawing properties through the project setup isn't going to work. And so this is where those title block properties for ISOs have to come through the line group.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right.
I got to keep remembering not to go into too much detail.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to go after it and explain how to do everything now. And then ISO annotations, kind of jumping to the last step of ISOs. So, yeah, making sure that you're getting these annotations correct, like I said, within your setup is crucial. Things like your bill of materials. I mean, there's a lot of people that the only bill of materials they actually use is the ISO bill of materials. So making sure that's set up correctly and you're getting the correct information is absolutely crucial.
And this is probably, so we didn't pull a list of all the possible annotations, but we pulled a list and made a list of the things that we most commonly modify for customers. And so these are by far and away, 80% of our projects, our clients ask us to customize these annotations.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I think one last one. So we kind of covered all our other deliverables. So our PNIDs, our orthos, our ISOs. Last thing you usually do is you have a bill of materials or a report that you're actually going to push out. So things can be ordered, things can be purchased, things like that. So that's kind of where the report template setup comes in.
Yeah, and it really is, the crux of the data is being able to get it out. And so this is where the Plant 3D product really shines, and being able to create extremely flexible and useful reports. So in addition to just doing takeoffs like normal, we also have a set of auditing reports that we use, like looking for blank or duplicate tags or blank or missing descriptions. I will put a note. The reason we listed the piping MTO and the PNID line list first is because those required a lot of customization from us. So we have developed a set of special reports that we've invested a lot of time, weeks of time into getting a good line list out so that you can, within maybe 30 minutes to an hour of configuration, have it up and running without pulling your hair out too much. The piping NPO, it just requires a little bit of training and understanding about grouping, but you can definitely get something out once you understand how the report is structured and how to use the tool. But we do have a template one that we use.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, having these templates set up has just been a lifesaver, a time saver. I mean, having to go in and way back when, go in and actually count linear feet, that was a process. So now, I mean, doing your things like your piping MTO, it's very nice to have. So, but like you said, there's also some things that you can use to really back check yourself, right? So things like your blank and duplicate tags, and your missing descriptions, those are really awesome, just tools. Those aren't necessarily things that you're going to deliver to a client, but great things to have in your toolbox back at the office. So awesome. Yeah. Well, I think that is everything we had. Do we have any questions?
Hey guys, first of all, thank you so much for taking us through that. I do have a question here in the chat box, really just around, do you guys plan on doing an episode 3, or where can they contact you for future training, or just to kind of, if they have any additional questions on the content here?
Yeah, so at this time, we don't have plans for an episode 3, but stay tuned. If you want to follow Applied Software on LinkedIn, you'll get notified of any of our webinar plans, and just stay in touch.
Absolutely, and I would like to add that we're doing we're going to continue posting blogs like we have been, but we're going to start posting more blogs centered around centered around your project templates, and these are going to be more of a how-to blog, if you will. So it's going to actually go in depth and explain like how to actually work through these processes and how to implement them in your workflow.
We do also have going out shortly. We will be asking for people who would like to be on our Plant Innovation Council. And so you should see an email coming to you around if you'd like to register for that. And what that does is that puts you in and gets you notified of any of our blog posts around innovation, as well as after this webinar, Misty's going to send out an email to follow up with more information about the things we talked about here.